The 16-year-old boy sat across from his school career counselor, his hands gripping a beat-up notebook that he'd carried everywhere for the past 8 months. Inside that notebook were dozens of sketches, rough calculations, and notes scribbled in the margins during classes when he should have been paying attention to algebra or history. His leg bounced nervously under the desk as he waited for the counselor to finish typing something on her computer. "So, tell me about your plans after graduation," she finally said, turning to face him with that practiced smile adults give teenagers when they're trying to seem interested. He took a deep breath and opened his notebook to a page he'd bookmarked with a torn piece of paper. "I want to build water purification systems that run on solar power. Systems that villages in poor countries can actually afford to use." The counselor's smile didn't fade, but something shifted in her eyes. That look, he'd seen it before. It was the same look his math teacher gave him when he stayed after class to talk about his project instead of asking about the upcoming test. "That's very noble," she said slowly, choosing her words carefully. "But let's talk about realistic options. Have you thought about community college? Maybe get your basics done, figure out what you really want to do," what he really wanted to do. As if he hadn't just told her. "I know what I want to do," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I've been researching this for months. Did you know that over 2 billion people don't have access to clean drinking water, and most of the purification systems out there are too expensive or need electricity that these villages don't have?" The counselor nodded, but he could tell she wasn't really hearing him. "Look, that's wonderful that you care about global issues, but you need to think about your future. Your grades are okay, not great. You don't play sports. Your family doesn't have money for a fancy college. I'm just trying to help you be practical here." Practical. He was learning to hate that word. The meeting ended the way he knew it would, with a handful of community college brochures and a suggestion to keep an open mind. He walked out of her office feeling smaller than when he'd walked in. School wasn't any better. When he gave a presentation in his science class about water purification methods, someone in the back row started humming the theme song from that old cartoon about the kid with the magic pollution-fighting ring. Within a week, everyone was calling him Captain Planet. They'd say it when he walked past in the hallways, whisper it loud enough for him to hear in the cafeteria. "Hey, Captain Planet, gonna save the world today? Don't forget your solar panels." The jokes stung more than he wanted to admit. These were kids he'd known since elementary school. Some of them he'd considered friends once. Now they treated his dream like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. His parents didn't laugh at him, which somehow made it worse. They worried. He could see it in their faces every time he brought up his project at dinner. His mom and dad had come to this country with nothing, built a small restaurant from the ground up, worked 16-hour days for years just to keep the lights on. They'd sacrificed everything so he could have opportunities they never had. And what was he doing with those opportunities? Chasing some impossible dream about bringing water to people he'd never met, in countries he'd never visited. "We just want you to be secure," his mother said one night after closing the restaurant. She was counting the day's cash, her hands moving automatically while her eyes stayed on him. "A good job, steady income. Maybe you could be an engineer at a big company. They make good money." "That's what I'm trying to do," he insisted. "Engineering, just different." His father shook his head slowly. "You have no money, no connections. Who's going to listen to a kid from a family that runs a restaurant?" He didn't have an answer for that, because his father was right. He had nothing except this idea that wouldn't leave him alone, that kept him up at night, that made him feel like his chest might explode if he didn't at least try. It had started 6 months ago with a documentary he'd watched late one night when he couldn't sleep. The images had burned themselves into his brain. Little kids, some of them younger than his baby cousin, walking miles every single day just to fill containers with brown water from a river. Water that made them sick, water that sometimes killed them. One part of the documentary showed a girl, maybe 7 years old, carrying a yellow jug that was almost as big as she was. The narrator explained that she walked this route twice a day, every day, instead of going to school, because someone had to get water for the family, and by the time she got home she'd be too tired to do anything except sleep and then wake up and do it all over again. That girl's face wouldn't leave him alone. He saw her when he was sitting in his air-conditioned classroom, complaining about being bored. He saw her when he turned on the tap at home and clean water just came out. Like magic, like it was the easiest thing in the world. He saw her when his friends threw away half-full water bottles without thinking twice. So he started researching, teaching himself about solar panels and filtration systems and UV purification, watching videos, reading articles, filling up notebook after notebook with ideas. Most of them were probably terrible ideas. He knew that. But he couldn't stop, even when the counselor dismissed him, even when his classmates mocked him, even when his parents looked at him with worry and confusion, even when he lay in bed at night feeling like maybe everyone else was right and he was just some stupid kid who didn't understand how the world really worked. He kept that image of the girl with the yellow jug in his mind because she wasn't laughing at him. She didn't think his dream was ridiculous. She didn't care about his grades or his lack of connections or his family's restaurant. She just needed clean water. And somehow, some way, he was going to figure out how to give it to her. High school became a strange kind of double life. During the day, he sat through classes like everyone else, pretended to care about pep rallies and who was dating who, tried to blend in enough that people would forget about the Captain Planet jokes. But the moment the final bell rang, he headed straight to the school's makerspace. The makerspace was this small room tucked away near the old gym, filled with 3D printers, hand tools, and workbenches that had seen better days. Most students never bothered with it. But for him, it became a second home. Sometimes a first home, really, since he spent more time there than anywhere else. He taught himself everything through YouTube videos and free online courses. How to wire a solar panel, how to build a basic filtration system, why his first 5 prototypes failed spectacularly. The janitor, an older man named Pete, got used to finding him there at 9 or 10 at night surrounded by parts and failures. "Kid, you gotta go home," Pete would say, not unkindly. "I need to lock up. Just 5 more minutes." It was never just 5 more minutes. His grades started slipping. Not dramatically, but enough that teachers noticed. His English teacher pulled him aside after class one day, concerned about the essay he'd turned in late, the one that was clearly written at 2 in the morning and made about half as much sense as it should have. "Is everything okay at home?" she asked. "Yeah, fine. Just been busy." "Busy with what?" He almost told her. Almost pulled out his phone to show her the latest design, explain what he was working on. But he'd learned his lesson. People either thought it was cute that he cared, or they thought he was wasting his time. Nobody actually believed he could do it, so he just shrugged and promised to do better on the next essay. College application season hit like a truck. Everyone around him was freaking out about SAT scores and recommendation letters and personal statements. His parents kept asking if he'd started his applications, their voices tight with stress they tried to hide. He applied to 15 schools. Not the fancy ones because his grades weren't good enough and his family couldn't afford them anyway, but decent state schools with engineering programs, schools where maybe, possibly, someone might take him seriously. The rejection letters started coming in February. Thin envelopes, impersonal emails. "We regret to inform you." After careful consideration, we had an exceptionally competitive applicant pool this year. The last one wasn't even a lie. He knew he wasn't competitive. His GPA was mediocre. He had no sports, no student government, no impressive list of clubs. Just this one weird obsession with water purification that didn't fit neatly into any box on the application. He got into one school. The local state university, the one 40 minutes from his house, the one that accepted basically anyone from in-state with a pulse and a high school diploma. They offered him a partial scholarship. Not enough, not nearly enough, but something. "You'll live at home," his mother said immediately. "Save money on housing." "Actually, I was thinking about the dorms. I could get a job, help pay for it." His parents exchanged one of those looks that parents give each other when they're having a whole conversation without words. "What kind of job?" his father asked. "I could work at the restaurant. Night shifts after classes," and that's exactly what happened. He moved into the cheapest dorm on campus, a concrete block of a building that smelled like mildew and broken dreams. His roommate was okay, a business major who spent most of his time at his girlfriend's apartment anyway. The routine became brutal fast. Classes all day, studying in between, then driving to his parents' restaurant for the dinner shift. He'd work until closing, cleaning tables and washing dishes and serving customers who sometimes left decent tips and sometimes left messes that took 20 minutes to clean up. He'd get back to the dorm around midnight, smell like frying oil and exhaustion, and his floor mates would be pre-gaming for parties or already passed out drunk in the hallway. He'd step over them, go to his room and pull out his notebooks, because the dream hadn't died. If anything, it had gotten stronger, sharper, more desperate. Maybe because everyone expected it to fade. Maybe because he needed to prove them wrong, prove himself right, prove that the girl with the yellow jug mattered more than being normal and practical and realistic. His prototypes were getting better, smaller, more efficient. He'd figured out how to reduce the cost by using different materials, how to make the solar panels more effective with less surface area. He filled his tiny dorm room with parts ordered from sketchy websites with his tip money. During his sophomore year, he got brave enough to approach one of his engineering professors after class. The guy was young, had a PhD from somewhere impressive, seemed like maybe he'd understand. He explained the project, speaking fast, trying to fit everything into the 5 minutes before the professor's next class. The clean water crisis, the solar solution, the cost reduction, everything he'd been working on for years now. The professor listened, nodded along, looked at the designs he'd pulled up on his phone. "This is admirable," the professor said finally. "Really admirable. But it's also incredibly impractical for someone in your position." There was that word again, impractical. What do you mean? "I mean you'd need funding. Real funding. You'd need to partner with NGOs, get pilot programs running, navigate international regulations. You'd probably need a graduate degree, connections in the development sector. It's not the kind of thing an undergraduate can just do." He stood there in the hallway, students flowing around them like water around rocks, and felt something crack inside his chest. So I should just give up? I'm not saying give up. I'm saying be realistic about the timeline and what you'd need to make this happen. Maybe focus on your degree first, get some experience in the field, then revisit this idea in a few years. A few years. The girl with the yellow jug would still be walking to that river in a few years, still getting sick from dirty water, still missing school. He thanked the professor and walked away, even though everything in him wanted to scream. That night he worked a double shift at the restaurant because someone called in sick. Didn't get back to the dorm until 2 in the morning. His roommate was gone for the weekend, which meant the room was dark and quiet and lonely in a way that made his bones ache. He sat on his bed, still smelling like grease and sweat, and pulled out his notebook. His hands were shaking. From exhaustion, from frustration, from the weight of carrying a dream that everyone else thought was too heavy for him to hold. Maybe they were right. Maybe he was being stupid and stubborn and naive. But he opened the notebook anyway and started sketching a new design. Because what else was he supposed to do? Give up? Admit defeat? Tell that little girl with the yellow jug that sorry, it was all too impractical? Not yet, not tonight. Maybe tomorrow he'd quit. But not tonight. Junior year hit different. He was exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix anymore. The kind of tired that lived in your bones and made everything feel heavy. His bank account was a joke. His body ran on coffee and restaurant leftovers. And his social life was basically non-existent. One Thursday afternoon, completely broke and feeling like he was drowning, he saw a flyer taped to a bulletin board in the engineering building. University Innovation Competition, $5,000 prize. All students welcome. He almost walked past it. Competitions were for the smart kids, the ones with fancy lab equipment and professors backing them. Kids who had time to make polished presentations because they weren't working 40 hours a week at their parents' restaurant. But $5,000. That money could buy materials for a real prototype, better solar panels, proper testing equipment, maybe even fund a small pilot program if he could find somewhere to test it. He took a picture of the flyer and submitted his application that night at 3 a.m., in between finishing an essay on thermodynamics and his shift at the restaurant. Figured he had nothing to lose except the time it took to fill out the form. 3 weeks later, he got an email. He'd been accepted. He had 2 months to prepare a presentation and demonstration. The next 2 months were chaos. He rebuilt his prototype from scratch using every penny he had saved, skipped meals to afford better materials. His roommate complained about the dorm room looking like a workshop exploded. His grades slipped even more. His parents asked if he was okay, their faces tight with worry he couldn't ease. "I'm fine," he lied. "Just busy with school." The day of the competition arrived on a Saturday in April. The university's main auditorium was set up with booths, and the place was packed. Graduate students with professional posters and tablet displays. Teams of undergrads in matching shirts with university lab logos. Everyone looked prepared and confident and like they belonged there. He set up his booth in a corner, trying not to feel like a fraud. His display was handwritten poster board and a clunky prototype that looked like it had been built in someone's garage, because it had been. Built in a dorm room specifically with hand tools in desperation. The judges started making their rounds. They were professors, local business people, a few engineers from companies in the area. They'd stop at each booth, ask questions, take notes, move on. He watched them nodding appreciatively at the polished presentations, spending long minutes at the graduate student projects. When they got to his booth, he launched into his pitch. Explained the water crisis, the cost problems with existing solutions, how his solar-powered system could purify 50 gallons a day for a fraction of the price. He demonstrated the prototype, showed his calculations, answered their questions as best he could. The judges were polite. They asked good questions, but he could see it in their faces, that same look he'd been seeing for years. Nice idea, kid. Very ambitious. Not realistic. They moved on to the next booth and he felt something inside him deflate. This was it. His last big shot, and he'd blown it. Story of his life. The competition lasted all day. By late afternoon, he was packing up his stuff, ready to haul his prototype back to the dorm and maybe just finally admit defeat. Apply for an internship at some engineering firm. Do what everyone had been telling him to do all along. Stop being so stubborn about this impossible dream. Excuse me. He turned around. A woman stood there, probably in her 40s, wearing a conference badge he hadn't noticed earlier. She wasn't one of the judges he'd talked to. Your water purification system, she said, her accent marking her as not from around here. Can you tell me more about it? He blinked, caught off guard. Sure. What do you want to know? Everything. But specifically, have you thought about deployment in rural areas? Places without any infrastructure? Something in her tone made him pay attention. This wasn't polite interest. This was someone who actually understood what he was talking about. That's exactly what it's designed for, he said, feeling a spark of energy return. No electricity needed except what the solar panel generates. The filtration system uses materials that can be replaced locally. I tried to make it as simple as possible so communities could maintain it themselves. The woman moved closer, examining his prototype with an intensity none of the judges had shown. She asked technical questions, good questions, the kind that showed she really got it. What's your name? She asked finally. He told her. I'm Dr. Rachel Kamani, she said. I'm an engineer from Kenya. I'm here visiting the university, giving a talk next week, and they invited me to judge this competition. She paused, still looking at his prototype. This system. This is what my village needs. His brain short-circuited for a second. Your village? I grew up in a rural area 3 hours from Nairobi. My family still lives there. They still walk to get water from a source that makes them sick. I became an engineer partly because I wanted to solve that problem. But every solution I've found is too expensive or too complicated. She looked up at him. This could actually work. He didn't know what to say. After years of people dismissing him, here was someone who got it. Really got it. Dr. Kamani pulled out her phone. I work with a small NGO that does pilot programs in East Africa. We're always looking for appropriate technology, solutions that actually fit the communities we serve. Would you be interested in testing this system in Uganda? We have a village partner there that's been asking for water solutions. Yes. Absolutely yes. She smiled. It won't be easy. We don't have much money. You'd have to modify the design based on their feedback, probably multiple times. The timeline would be months, maybe longer, but if you're serious about this, I can make it happen. I'm serious, he said, and he'd never meant anything more in his life. They exchanged contact information. She promised to email him within a week with details. He floated through the rest of the competition in a daze, barely hearing when they announced the winners. He didn't win, obviously. Some graduate student with a machine learning project took first place, but he didn't care. Because someone believed in him. Someone saw what he was trying to do and thought it could work. Someone who actually knew what they were talking about, who understood the problem from the inside, who had connections and experience and could make this real. He drove back to the dorm, his prototype rattling in the passenger seat, and called his parents. How'd it go? His mother asked. I didn't win, he said. But Mom, something better happened. He told them about Dr. Kamani, about the pilot program, about Uganda. His mother was quiet for a long time. This is really happening? She asked finally. I think so. Yeah. I think it's really happening. That night, he couldn't sleep, not from exhaustion, but from excitement, from possibility, from the terrifying and thrilling reality that his impossible dream might actually have a chance. He pulled out his notebook and started planning. Real planning, not just fantasies. Because now he had a deadline and a destination and people counting on him. The girl with the yellow jug suddenly felt a little bit closer. Not close enough, not yet, but closer than she'd ever been. And for the first time in 3 years, he let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, he could actually do this. Dr. Kimani kept her promise. A week later, the email arrived with details about a village in eastern Uganda that needed water solutions. There was a contact person, a community leader named Joseph who spoke English. There were logistics to figure out, shipping costs to calculate, modifications to make based on the local climate and available resources. The next 6 months were the hardest and most amazing of his life. He'd video call with Joseph and other village members, the connection cutting in and out, their faces freezing on screen mid-sentence. They'd describe their current situation, what they needed, what wouldn't work for them. He'd take notes, redesign, test, redesign again. The sun here is very strong, Joseph told him during one call. But also we have rainy season. Heavy rain for months. Back to the drawing board. Waterproofing, durability. Making sure the system could handle both extremes. He maxed out a credit card buying materials. Stopped buying new clothes. Ate nothing but restaurant leftovers and ramen. His parents watched him with this mixture of pride and terror. Wanting to support him but scared he was destroying his future for something that might not work. What if it fails? His father asked one night after closing. Then I'll try again, he said, though the thought terrified him too. Finally, in December of his junior year, he shipped the first system to Uganda. The shipping cost alone made him want to cry, but Dr. Kimani's NGO covered half of it. He tracked the package obsessively, watching it move across the ocean through customs into the country. Then he waited. Joseph had said they'd install it and test it over 2 weeks, let the community try it, see if it really worked in real conditions with real people. The waiting nearly killed him. He refreshed his email every 10 minutes. Barely slept. Couldn't focus on his finals, which was bad because he was already on academic probation from his GPA dropping. Christmas came. His family exchanged small gifts at the restaurant, the way they always did. He smiled and pretended to be present, but his mind was thousands of miles away, wondering if his system was working, or if he'd just wasted 6 months and thousands of dollars on another failure. On December 28th, at 2:47 in the morning, his phone buzzed with an email. From Joseph. His hands shook as he opened it. There were photos attached. He clicked the first one and his breath caught. A woman standing next to his purification system holding a clear glass of water. She was smiling. Actually smiling. He clicked through the rest. Kids drinking from cups. The solar panel angled toward the sun. The filtration system dusty but working. And one photo of Joseph giving a thumbs up next to a sign that said, 50 gallons clean water today. The email itself was simple. It works. The village is very happy. Can you send more? He sat there in his dark dorm room, lit only by his laptop screen, and cried. Actually sobbed like a kid, muffling the sound so he wouldn't wake his roommate. All those years of people laughing at him, telling him to be realistic, looking at him like he was crazy. And it worked. It actually worked. He called his parents at 3 a.m. They didn't answer, which made sense because normal people were asleep. He left a rambling, probably incoherent voicemail about the photos and the water and how it worked. His mother called back at 6 a.m., which meant she'd barely slept after hearing his message. Show me the pictures, she demanded. He drove to the restaurant and showed her on his phone. His mother stared at the photos for a long time, her eyes getting shiny. My son did this, she said quietly. Yeah. With your help, your restaurant money. She pulled him into a hug, which was rare. His parents weren't big on physical affection. I'm sorry we doubted you. You were just being realistic. No, we were being scared. There's a difference. The Uganda success got attention. Dr. Kimani shared it with her NGO network. A foundation in Germany asked about doing a pilot in Kenya. A small charity in Honduras wanted to know if the system could work in their region. He graduated that spring. Barely. His GPA was 2.7. No honors, No awards except one he'd won from the engineering department for innovative thinking, which felt like a consolation prize. While his classmates posted pictures in caps and gowns, celebrating job offers at tech companies and grad school acceptances, he posted nothing because he had no job lined up. No grad school. Just $40,000 in student debt, a prototype that worked in one village, and a dream that everyone still thought was unrealistic. And then COVID hit. The world shut down in March of 2020. He'd planned to spend that summer traveling to Uganda, meeting Joseph in person, installing more systems. Instead, he was trapped at home, living in his childhood bedroom watching the news report thousands of deaths while he felt helpless and useless. The restaurant struggled. His parents tried to hide how bad it was, but he saw the numbers. Delivery and takeout weren't enough. They were burning through savings. He should have been looking for a real job, something to help his family. Instead, he was in his bedroom, still working on water purification systems for people he'd never met. The guilt ate at him. But so did the emails from Joseph from the village, telling him how the water system was helping during the pandemic, how it was one less thing to worry about when everything else was falling apart. He started applying for grants and funding, little ones, big ones, anything he could find. He wrote applications until his eyes blurred, practicing his pitch in the mirror, trying to sound confident and professional instead of desperate and scared. Rejection after rejection. Not the right fit. Insufficient business plan. Lack of scalability. Too early stage. He kept a spreadsheet. By September 2020, he'd applied to 127 different funding sources. He'd gotten exactly $0. His parents started talking about him getting a regular job again. Just until things stabilized. Just to have income. Just to be practical, that word. He still hated it. One Tuesday in October, eating leftover rice in his childhood bedroom, he looked at his reflection in his dark laptop screen and wondered if everyone had been right all along. Maybe he was just stubborn and stupid. Maybe he should have listened to his career counselor 7 years ago and gone to community college and learned to want normal things. His phone buzzed. An email from a small foundation in Seattle. He almost didn't open it. Couldn't handle another rejection today, but he opened it anyway, because what else was he going to do? We are pleased to inform you that your application has been selected for a $15,000 seed grant. He read it 3 times to make sure it was real. $15,000. Not enough to scale big, but enough to keep going. Enough to install systems in 3 more villages. Enough to hire 2 people maybe if they'd work for basically nothing. Enough to not give up. Not yet. He walked downstairs where his mother was watching the news, her face tired and worried like it had been for months. "Mom," he said, "I got a grant." She looked up at him, hope and fear mixing on her face. "How much?" $15,000. Is that good?" "It's enough," he said. "It's enough to keep trying." She nodded slowly, then managed a small smile. "Then that's what you'll do. Keep trying." And so he did. That $15,000 became the foundation for everything that came next. He hired 2 volunteers, college students who believed in the mission enough to work for almost nothing. They operated out of his parents' garage, which his mother grudgingly cleared out, though she complained about the mess every single day. The first year was brutal. Installing systems in Kenya, Honduras, and 2 more villages in Uganda. Each location had different challenges. Different water sources, different climates, different community needs. He learned fast that there was no one-size-fits-all solution. Despite what he'd thought in college in Honduras, the rainy season destroyed their first installation because he hadn't properly waterproofed the electrical connections. They had to ship a replacement and eat the cost. In Kenya, the UV filtration component kept failing until a local technician figured out it was the dust, and they needed to add a protective covering he hadn't thought of. Every mistake cost money they didn't have and time they couldn't afford to lose. But slowly, testimonial by testimonial, the systems worked. Villages reported fewer kids getting sick. Families saved hours each day they used to spend walking for water. Schools could finally afford to stay open more days because teachers weren't constantly missing work due to waterborne illness. The data started rolling in. A village in Uganda reported a 40% drop in diarrheal diseases after 6 months. A community in Honduras calculated they were saving an average of 3 hours per family, every single day, which meant parents could work more, And kids could go to school. Real numbers. Real impact. The kind of stuff that made grant applications stronger. He applied for bigger funding, armed with actual results now instead of just promises. Got rejected from most of them, but landed a few smaller grants. 20,000 here, 30,000 there. Enough to keep growing. Slowly, painfully slowly. His parents' restaurant survived the pandemic and started doing better. Well enough that his mother stopped looking quite so worried every time he talked about the water project. His father even started bragging to customers sometimes, showing them photos on his phone of the systems in different countries. "My son built these," he'd say to anyone who'd listen, "helping people get clean water." The transformation from be realistic to pride hadn't happened overnight. It happened in small moments over years, as they watched him refuse to give up despite every reason to quit. By 2023, 3 years after that first grant, they had systems in 12 countries. Not thousands of systems, but hundreds, operating in small villages and remote communities that bigger organizations ignored because they weren't cost-effective, weren't scalable in the traditional sense, didn't photograph well for fundraising campaigns. He hired more people, engineers who believed in the work enough to take less money than they could make elsewhere. Local technicians in different countries who understood their communities better than he ever could. An accountant who worked part-time and somehow kept their shoestring budget from completely falling. A part they moved out of his parents' garage and into a tiny office space that smelled like mildew and broken air conditioning. It felt like a palace. The growth attracted more attention. A tech blog wrote about them, then a magazine. Social media posts from volunteers and village leaders started getting shared. People he'd gone to high school with, people who'd called him Captain Planet and laughed at his presentations started sharing his articles. "So proud of this guy. We went to school together," they'd write, as if they hadn't mocked him relentlessly. He tried not to be bitter about it. Tried to focus on the work, not the validation he'd desperately wanted years ago but didn't need quite as much anymore. In 2024, a major foundation noticed them. The kind of foundation that gave out six-figure grants, not the scrappy $5,000 ones he'd built his operation on. They invited him to pitch. He flew to New York, his first time on a plane in years. Walked into a conference room with mahogany tables and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Faced a panel of program officers and foundation executives who'd probably never carried a yellow jug for miles just to get dirty water. He showed them the numbers, the systems they'd deployed, the people they'd reached, the health outcomes they'd measured. Showed them testimonials from village leaders and photos of kids drinking clean water, and data sets proving long-term sustainability. "What's your scale plan?" one of them asked. "How do we know this isn't just a boutique operation that works in a few villages but can't grow?" It was a fair question. He'd asked himself the same thing 1,000 times. "We're not trying to be the biggest," he said. "We're trying to be the best fit for communities that everyone else ignores. The places that are too small or too remote for big NGOs. We customize every system to the local context. That's not boutique. That's appropriate technology." They asked about financials, sustainability, local partnerships, maintenance protocols. He answered everything, feeling more confident than he'd expected, because he knew this work inside and out now. He'd lived it for 7 years, had the failures and the calluses and the midnight problem-solving sessions to prove it. 3 weeks later, they offered him a $250,000 grant. $250,000, more money than he'd raised in all the previous years combined. He called his mother from the airport. "We got it," he said, his voice shaking. "The big grant." "We got it," she cried on the phone. Actually sobbed. "I knew you would make it happen." "No, you didn't," he said, laughing through his own tears. "You thought I was crazy." Both things can be true. The money changed everything. They could scale properly now. Hire a real staff. Invest in better materials and more rigorous testing. Partner with universities for research. Build a supply chain that didn't depend on him maxing out credit cards. By late 2024, they'd deployed over 10,000 systems across 23 countries. Conservative estimates said they were providing clean water to over 500,000 people daily. 500,000 people who could drink without getting sick, who could send their kids to school instead of on water runs, who had a few more hours in their day to work or rest or just live. The recognition followed. Awards from NGOs and international development organizations, invitations to speak at conferences, news articles calling him a young innovator and social entrepreneur, terms that felt strange and uncomfortable because he'd never set out to be innovative or entrepreneurial. He just wanted to help the girl with the yellow jug. In January 2025, 5 years after graduating college, he got an email from the United Nations. They wanted to give him some kind of Young Innovator Award at a ceremony in Geneva, Switzerland, the UN. It felt surreal. He almost didn't go. Felt like flying to Europe for an award ceremony was a waste of money that could deploy another 20 systems. But his mother insisted. "You need to accept recognition," she said firmly. "Not for you, for everyone who comes after you, so they know it's possible." So he went. Wore a suit his father helped him pick out, feeling uncomfortable and out of place among diplomats and policymakers and people who'd been doing this work for decades, while he'd been figuring it out in a garage. When they called his name, he walked across the stage in front of hundreds of people, accepted a plaque and gave a short speech that he'd practiced a dozen times and still almost fumbled. "Everyone laughed at my dream," he said, his voice echoing in the huge hall. "My counselor, my classmates, even people I loved. They laughed because they couldn't see what I saw. But the people who needed clean water? They never laughed once. Not the village leaders I worked with. Not the mothers whose kids stopped getting sick. Not the girl I saw in a documentary when I was 16, carrying a jug almost as big as she was." He paused, looking out at the audience. Somewhere in there, Dr. Kamani was sitting. She'd flown in to see him receive the award. And his parents, who'd used their savings to make the trip. "I didn't do this despite the laughter," he continued. "I did it because of the people who never laughed, who took me seriously when I was just a kid with a notebook full of sketches, who believed that clean water mattered more than being practical or realistic or playing it safe. So if you're sitting here with a dream that people are laughing at, here's what I want you to know. Find the people who aren't laughing. Find the people who need what you're trying to build. Dream for them. Work for them. And don't stop until you've made it real." The applause started small but built into something that made his chest tight. People standing, clapping, and he felt simultaneously proud and embarrassed and overwhelmed. After the ceremony, during the reception, dozens of people wanted to talk to him. Potential partners, funders, other innovators. His old classmates were blowing up his phone with congratulations messages, trying to reconnect, and he felt nothing but a weary kind of sadness for younger him, the kid who would have given anything for their approval. But there was one message that mattered, from Joseph in Uganda, sent with a photo. The original water system they'd installed 5 years ago, still running, still providing clean water. And next to it, a teenager who'd been one of the kids in the first photos Joseph had sent. She was smiling, holding a glass of clean water. "She's in secondary school now," Joseph wrote. "Wants to be an engineer like you. Says she's going to help build water systems too." He stared at that photo for a long time. This girl who'd been maybe 8 years old when his system first brought clean water to her village. Now almost 13, with dreams of her own. Dreams that wouldn't exist if he'd listened to everyone who'd laughed. Later that night, back in his hotel room overlooking Geneva, he pulled out his old notebook. The one he'd carried to that career counselor meeting when he was 16. The pages were worn now, some of the sketches barely visible, but he'd never thrown it away. He flipped to the first page, where he'd written in teenage handwriting, "Everyone deserves clean water. I'm going to help make that happen." Simple words from a kid who'd had no idea how hard it would be, how many times he'd want to quit, how many years of doubt and failure and grinding poverty it would take, how much it would cost him in sleep and money and relationships. But also, that kid had no idea how good it would feel, how right, how real. He took a photo of that first page and posted it online with a caption. "To everyone who laughed at this dream, thank you for the motivation. To everyone who believed in it, thank you for making it real. To everyone still working on their impossible dreams, don't stop. The world needs what you're trying to build." His parents called to say goodnight, their voices proud and emotional. His mother asked when he was coming home. "Few more days," he said. "Got meetings with some potential partners here, but Mom, thank you for letting me be unrealistic." She laughed, that particular laugh that meant she was trying not to cry. "Someone had to believe in you, even when you were being stupid about it." "I was pretty stupid about it. The best kind of stupid," his father said in the background. He hung up and looked out at the Geneva skyline, at this city so far from where he'd started, thinking about the journey from a teenager with a notebook to whatever he was now. Not successful exactly, because success implied an ending and this work would never end. There would always be more villages, more people without clean water, more problems to solve. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the dream wasn't ever supposed to come true completely. Maybe it was supposed to keep pulling you forward, keep making you better, keep proving that the impossible was just the not yet possible. Somewhere in Uganda, in Kenya, in Honduras, and 20 other countries, his water systems were running through the night, providing clean water while he slept, helping families he'd never meet, proving that a dream everyone laughed at could become something real and solid and life-changing. The girl with the yellow jug didn't need to carry it as far anymore. And someday maybe she wouldn't need to carry it at all. That was worth every laugh, every rejection, every moment of doubt. That was worth everything.